The foundation of shadows. Ania Vasquez adjusted the crystal vase on the mahogany conference table, ensuring the white orchids caught the morning light just right. In 30 minutes, Marcus would arrive with the Pemberton Group executives, and everything had to be perfect. She'd learned long ago that her husband's success depended on these seemingly small details: the imported coffee beans, the precisely arranged pastries, the way she greeted clients with that perfect blend of warmth and professionalism that made them feel valued. "Mrs. Vasquez, the quarterly reports are ready for review," called Jessica, their assistant, from the doorway. Elena nodded, smoothing her navy dress as she walked toward Marcus's corner office. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown, Seattle stretched below them, a testament to the empire they built together over 15 years. Well, the empire Marcus had built. She corrected herself with familiar resignation. Vasquez Capital Management occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Columbia Tower, managing portfolios worth over $2 billion. Elena remembered when it was just Marcus working from their garage, cold-calling potential investors while she balanced their checkbook and researched market trends until 2 in the morning. She'd been the one to suggest diversifying into emerging markets, to notice the patterns in tech startups that Marcus later claimed as his insights. "The Pemberton meeting is crucial," Marcus had told her the night before, pacing their Bellevue mansion study. "If we land this account, we're looking at a $300 million portfolio. This could change everything." Elena had smiled and nodded, as she always did, but something in his tone felt different, urgent, almost desperate. She settled at her desk in the alcove, adjacent to his office, not quite inside the inner sanctum, but close enough to handle the constant stream of calls, emails, and decisions that kept the firm running. Most people assumed she was an exceptionally well-paid secretary. The truth was more complicated. Over the years, Elena had become Marcus's shadow partner, handling client relationships with the intuitive touch he lacked, spotting financial irregularities before they became problems, and maintaining the delicate network of contacts that kept money flowing into their funds. Got her phone buzzed. A text from their daughter Sophia, now a sophomore at Stanford. "Mom, can you transfer some money? Textbooks are crazy expensive." Elena smiled, quickly initiating the transfer from their joint account. At 19, Sophia was studying economics and business, often calling to discuss market theories with an enthusiasm that reminded Alana of her own younger self. "Elena, could you come in here?" Marcus's voice carried that particular edge she'd learned to recognize, the one that appeared when he was hiding something. She found him staring at his computer screen, jaw tight with concentration. "The Henderson account," he said without looking up. "I need you to prepare the transfer documentation for the Cayman subsidiary by tomorrow." Elena frowned. The Henderson account was their largest client, and she'd been managing their relationship personally for 8 years. "Are we restructuring their holdings?" "I haven't seen any client requests for." "It's complicated," Marcus interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. Something flickered there, guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Just trust me on this one. The paperwork needs to be ready by 9 tomorrow morning." Trust. The word hung between them like a challenge. Elena had always trusted Marcus, believed in his vision, supported his ambitions, even when it meant sacrificing her own. But lately, she'd noticed things. Hushed phone calls that ended when she entered the room. Late-night meetings, he claimed, were with potential investors, but never materialized into new accounts. And now this secretive transfers involving their most valuable client. "Of course," she said quietly. "I'll have everything ready." As Marcus returned to his screen, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office's air conditioning. After 15 years of marriage and partnership, she was finally beginning to wonder if the foundation she'd helped build was solid, or if it had been constructed on shifting sand all along. cracks in the facade DR. Sarah Chun pushed her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose as she studied the documents spread across her kitchen table. As a forensic accountant who'd built her reputation untangling corporate fraud cases, she'd seen enough creative bookkeeping to recognize the warning signs. But finding them in her best friend's husband's business records made her stomach twist with dread. "Elena, you need to see this," Sarah said into her phone, her voice carefully controlled. "Can you come over tonight? And don't tell Marcus where you're going." 3 hours later, Helena sat across from Sarah, her face pale in the lamplight. Between them lay printouts of bank statements, transfer records, and incorporation documents that Sarah had spent the afternoon analyzing. What she discovered was worse than either of them had imagined. "He's been siphoning money for months," Sarah explained, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always just under the reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. Her finger traced a pattern of transfers. "Look at this Henderson account, funds being moved to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, then immediately transferred to accounts under Marcus's sole control." Elena's hands trembled as she picked up a bank statement. "But this account, I've never seen this account before. Meridian Holdings Limited? That's because you're not listed as a signatory, despite being a 50% owner of Vasquez Capital Management." Sarah's voice grew harder. "Elena, he's been systematically moving community property into accounts where you have no access or legal claim." The room seemed to spin around Elena. She thought of all the late nights she'd spent building client relationships, the investment strategies she'd developed, the crises she'd navigated to keep the firm profitable. "How much are we talking about?" Sarah consulted her notes. "Based on what I can trace, at least $40 million. But Elena, there's more." She pulled out another set of documents. "I found these incorporation papers filed last month. Marcus has created a new entity, Apex Investment Partners. He's been transferring your biggest clients to this new firm, along with their assets." "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "I would have known. I handle all the client communications. All the—" She stopped, remembering the Henderson transfer request, the mysterious meetings, the way Marcus had been increasingly secretive about certain accounts. "He's been forging your electronic signature on transfer authorizations," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "And Elena, I found something else. Divorce papers. They're drafted, but not filed yet." Elena's breath caught. "Divorce papers?" Sarah nodded grimly. "He's claiming the business assets belong entirely to his new company, which was formed after your marriage, making them separate property. If these papers are filed as written, you'd walk away with minimal alimony and maybe the house. Everything you built together would legally belong to him." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the tick of Sarah's grandmother's clock on the mantel. Elena stared at the documents, seeing 15 years of her life reduced to numbers on pages, her contributions erased by carefully crafted legal language. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "I ran a background check on Apex Investment Partners. Marcus isn't the only principal. There's a woman named Victoria Sterling listed as co-founder and chief operating officer." Elena looked up sharply. She knew that name. Marcus had mentioned Victoria as a potential business partner he'd been meeting with, a former Goldman Sachs executive who'd recently moved to Seattle. Elena had even suggested they invite her to dinner to discuss opportunities. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "The business relationship started 6 months ago." "As for anything else, double quotes," Sarah shrugged sympathetically. "That's not something I can trace through financial records." Elena stood abruptly, walking to Sarah's window, overlooking Lake Washington. In the distance, the lights of Bellevue twinkled, including the lights of her own home, where Marcus was probably working late again, or so he claimed. "What do I do?" she asked finally. Sarah joined her at the window. You fight. And Elena, you have advantages he doesn't know about. Those client relationships? They're yours, not his. The investment strategies that made the firm successful? You developed most of them. The network of contacts and referral sources. You built that. She placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. Marcus may think he's been clever, but he's underestimated the most important asset the firm has, you. Elena nodded slowly, feeling something new crystallizing inside her chest. Not just anger, though that was there too. Something harder, more focused. For 15 years, she'd been content to work in the shadows, supporting Marcus's ambitions. But if he wanted to play this game, she'd show him what happened when shadows stepped into the light. Sarah, she said quietly, I think I'm going to need a very good lawyer. Gathering the storm, Antonio Rivera had always prided himself on reading people correctly, skill that had served him well during his 20-year career in investment management. As head of operations at Vasquez Capital Management, he'd watched Elena navigate the firm's complexities with a quiet competence that impressed him far more than Marcus's flashy presentations to potential clients. So when Elena called requesting a private meeting at a coffee shop in Fremont, away from the office, Antonio knew something significant was brewing. I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty, Elena said, sliding into the booth across from him. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much since discovering Marcus's betrayal 3 days earlier. How many of our key staff members would you trust in a crisis? Antonio studied her carefully. In all his years working with Elena, he'd never seen this particular expression determined, calculating, with an edge of steel he hadn't known existed. That depends on the crisis. Are we talking about a hostile takeover regulatory investigation, or something more personal? All of the above, potentially. Elena leaned forward, lowering her voice. Antonio, I know you've noticed things. Marcus's secretive meetings, the way certain client files have become off-limits, the staff changes he's been making without consulting me. Antonio nodded slowly. He'd been increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. 2 months ago, Marcus had quietly reassigned Jennifer Walsh, their best portfolio analyst, to work exclusively on special projects that Antonio wasn't allowed to oversee. Last month, it was David Park from Client Relations, suddenly reporting directly to Marcus on matters involving their largest accounts. I've been concerned, Antonio admitted. The operational structure we've built over the years is being dismantled piece by piece. It's affecting team morale, and frankly, it's making me question my future here. Elaine pulled out a tablet and opened a document. I need to show you something, but first, I need your word that this conversation stays between us. You have it. 4. The next 30 minutes, Elena walked Antonio through Sarah's discoveries, the shell companies, the diverted funds, the planned corporate restructuring that would effectively steal the business from under her. Antonio's expression grew darker with each revelation. That bastard, Antonio muttered, and immediately apologized. I'm sorry, Elena. I know he's still your husband, but this is theft, Elena finished, and fraud, and possibly worse. She closed the tablet. Antonio, I'm going to fight this, but I can't do it alone. I need people I trust, people who understand the real value of what we've built here. Antonio was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me save our company. The real company, not whatever hollow shell Marcus is planning to leave behind. Alana's voice grew stronger. I've already spoken with our attorney. There are legal remedies available, but they'll only work if I can demonstrate that I have the operational knowledge and team support to actually run Vasquez Capital Management. You mean take over as CEO? I mean claim my rightful position as CEO. This was never just Marcus's company, Antonio. You know that better than anyone. Antonio thought about his mortgage, his daughter's college tuition, the comfortable life he'd built. Then he thought about the clients who'd specifically requested to work with Elena over the years, the investment strategies she'd developed that had consistently outperformed the market, the way she'd personally mentored junior staff members while Marcus was too busy networking at industry events. "Who else are you approaching?" he asked. Jennifer Walsh agreed to help yesterday. She's been documenting everything she can access about the transfers and account changes. David Park is meeting with me tomorrow. Several clients have already reached out to him expressing concerns about changes to their account management. Elena paused. "I'm also talking to Lisa Chun from compliance and Michael Rodriguez from our tech team." Antonio raised an eyebrows. "You're building a shadow management structure." "I'm identifying the people who actually run this company day to day, as opposed to the people who take credit for running it." Elena's smile was sharp. "Marcus has spent so much time playing corporate politics and chasing new deals that he's lost touch with the operational reality of our business. That's going to be his downfall. What about the clients?" "Marcus has the primary relationships with most of our major accounts." Elena shook her head. "That's what he thinks. But who do you think they actually call when they have questions about their portfolios? Who sends them the detailed quarterly reports they rely on? Who remembers their children's names and their risk tolerance preferences?" She leaned back. "Marcus is good at the initial pitch, Antonio. I'm good at everything that happens after that." Antonio found himself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. "You've really thought this through." "I've had 15 years to think about it. I just never imagined I'd need to use that knowledge to defend myself against my own husband." Elena's expression hardened again. "But if Marcus wants to play games with our livelihood, he's about to learn that I know this business better than he ever realized." Antonio extended his hand across the table. "Count me in." "What do you need me to do first?" "Secure the client database and all operational procedures documentation." "And Antonio?" Elena shook his hand firmly. "Start preparing yourself to be COO of a very different company. Because when this is over, Vasquez Capital Management is going to be run by people who actually understand what makes it successful." As they left the coffee shop, Antonio felt a surge of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. For too long, he'd watched Elena's contributions be minimized and overlooked. Now, finally, she was ready to step out of the shadows and claim what was rightfully hers. The reckoning Judge Patricia Holloway had presided over enough corporate disputes to recognize when a case was about to explode beyond anyone's expectations. As she reviewed the emergency injunction filing that had landed on her desk at 7 that morning, she could see all the elements of a perfect storm: betrayal, fraud, and a woman who'd clearly been underestimated by everyone, including, perhaps, herself. The courtroom was packed despite the emergency hearing being scheduled with only 12 hours' notice. On one side sat Marcus Vasquez with his legal team, looking confident but increasingly agitated as he whispered urgently with his attorneys. On the other side, Elena sat with her counsel, projecting a calm authority that seemed to fill her corner of the room. "Your Honor," began Elena's attorney, Catherine Morrison, "we're here today because Mr. Vasquez has systematically looted the marital assets and business he built with his wife, preparing to leave her with nothing while he starts fresh with a new company and, allegedly, a new partner." Judge Holloway noted the slight tightening around Marcus's eyes at that last comment. She'd seen that reaction before. Guilty parties always flinched when their secrets were exposed in open court. "We have documented evidence of $43 million in fraudulent transfers," Morrison continued, "along with the theft of client relationships, proprietary investment algorithms, and trade secrets. My client isn't just seeking to protect her assets, Your Honor. She's seeking to save a company that employs 67 people and manages over $2 billion in client funds. As Morrison presented her evidence, Judge Holloway watched Elena carefully. The woman sat perfectly still, occasionally making notes, but never showing the emotional volatility that often characterized wronged spouses in her courtroom. Instead, Elena radiated the controlled focus of someone who'd made peace with what needed to be done. Marcus's attorney, Jonathan Whitfield, stood to respond. Your Honor, these allegations are baseless. Mr. Vasquez has made legitimate business decisions to restructure his company's operations. His wife, while supportive, has never been an active partner in the business's strategic direction. That's interesting, Judge Holloway interrupted, consulting her notes. Because I have affidavits here from 15 clients specifically requesting that Mrs. Vasquez continue managing their accounts. I also have documentation showing that she developed the proprietary risk assessment algorithms that generated 60% of the firm's profits last year. She looked up sharply. Are you arguing that someone can steal their own intellectual property, Mr. Whitfield? Before Whitfield could respond, the courtroom doors opened and Antonio Rivera entered, carrying a box of documents. He approached Elena's table and whispered something to Morrison, who immediately stood. Your Honor, we've just received additional evidence that we believe is crucial to this hearing. Mr. Rivera, the head of operations at Vasquez Capital Management, has documentation showing that as of this morning, 8 major clients have formally requested to terminate their relationships with the firm if Mrs. Vasquez is not involved in their account management. Judge Holloway frowned. This morning? How is that possible? Antonio stepped forward. Your Honor, word travels fast in investment circles. When clients learned about the potential disruption to their account management, they began calling our office. Several have made it clear they view Mrs. Vasquez as their primary point of contact and trust her judgment more than other parties involved. Marcus shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a coordinated attack on my business. Your business? Elena spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the courtroom with quiet authority. Your Honor, may I address the court directly? Judge Holloway nodded, intrigued despite herself. Elena stood, and Judge Holloway noticed how the entire room seemed to focus on her. Your Honor, for 15 years, I believed my role was to support my husband's vision. I managed client relationships, developed investment strategies, and handled the day-to-day operations that kept our firm profitable. I did this willingly, proudly, because I thought we were building something together. She gestured toward the evidence tables. But these documents show that while I was building our company, my husband was building an exit strategy that erased my contributions and left me with nothing. He forged my signature, moved our assets to accounts I couldn't access, and planned to abandon the clients who trusted me to manage their life savings. Elena's voice grew stronger. Your Honor, I'm not here as a betrayed wife seeking revenge. I'm here as a business owner protecting her company and her clients. The people in this courtroom today, Antonio Rivera, Jennifer Walsh, David Park, and others, they represent the operational heart of Vasquez Capital Management. They're here because they understand that a company's value isn't in its name or its founder's ego. It's in the trust clients place in it and the expertise of the people who honor that trust every day. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Mrs. Vasquez, are you prepared to take operational control of the company if I grant this injunction? I am, Your Honor. I've been running the important parts of it for years. Now I'm just asking for the legal authority to protect what we've built. The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the documents before her. Finally, she looked up. I'm granting the emergency injunction. All assets and client accounts of Vasquez Capital Management are frozen pending a full audit. Mrs. Vasquez, you are hereby appointed interim CEO with full operational authority. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Vasquez, you are prohibited from accessing company accounts, contacting clients, or removing any materials from the business premises." As the gavel fell, Judge Holloway watched Elena's face. There was no triumph there. No vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd finally stepped into the role she was always meant to fill. Marcus stared at his wife in shock, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The woman he'd tried to push aside had just outmaneuvered him completely, using the very business skills he'd always dismissed to claim control of the empire they'd built together. Elena gathered her papers calmly, already focused on the work ahead. She had a company to save. Phoenix ascending 1 year later, Elena Vasquez stood in the renovated conference room of what was now officially called Meridian Capital Partners, watching the morning sun cast golden light across the Seattle skyline. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd kept the name Marcus had chosen for one of his shell companies, transforming his tool of deception into a symbol of rebirth. "The quarterly numbers are extraordinary," Antonio Rivera said, entering with a tablet full of performance metrics. As her cue, he'd proven invaluable in rebuilding the company's operational structure. "We're up 38% over last year, and we've gained 12 new major clients." Elena smiled, accepting the coffee he offered. "Any word from the Steinberg Group?" "They're ready to commit. $200 million to start, with the potential for more if we can demonstrate consistent returns." Antonio grinned. "Apparently, our reputation for personalized service and innovative strategies has spread faster than we expected." Through the windows, Elena could see the smaller office building across the street where Marcus now worked. After the legal settlement, he'd managed to salvage enough to start a modest consulting firm, but the investment world had largely moved on without him. His betrayal had become industry gossip, and few clients were willing to trust someone who tried to steal from his own wife. "Mrs. Vasquez?" Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway, no longer the nervous analyst she'd been under Marcus's management. As head of research, she'd flourished under Elena's mentorship. "The Stanford Business School team is here for your guest lecture preparation." Elena nodded. She'd been invited to speak about entrepreneurship and leadership, specifically about building trust in financial services. The invitation had come with a note from the dean, mentioning that several students had specifically requested to hear from the CEO who turned betrayal into triumph. As she walked toward the conference room where the students waited, Elena caught her reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the supportive wife who'd arranged flowers and managed behind-the-scenes details. This woman wore confidence like a perfectly tailored suit, her presence commanding attention rather than deflecting it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Saw the Forbes article about the company's growth. So proud of you, Mom. Can't wait to graduate and maybe work for the family business." Elena smiled. The family business, not Marcus's business or her husband's company, but something that truly belonged to her and could be passed on to the next generation. The students were young, eager, full of questions about market strategies and leadership principles. But the question that mattered most came from a quiet young woman in the back. "Ms. Vasquez, how did you know you were ready to step out of the shadows and take control?" Elena paused, thinking of that moment in Sarah's kitchen when she'd first seen the evidence of Marcus's betrayal. "I realized that I'd been ready for years," she said finally. "I just hadn't been given the opportunity or forced to create one." Sometimes the greatest tragedy becomes the catalyst for discovering who you really are. Later that evening, Elena worked late in her office, reviewing proposals for expanding into sustainable investment funds, an area she'd been passionate about for years, but had never had the authority to pursue. At 9 o'clock, she finally packed up, satisfied with the day's progress dot. As she walked to her car, she noticed Marcus leaving his building across the street. For a moment, Their eyes met across the distance. He raised his hand in what might have been a wave or a gesture of acknowledgement. Elena nodded politely and continued to her car. She felt no anger anymore, no bitterness about the betrayal that had upended her life. Marcus had inadvertently given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover that she didn't need to stand in anyone's shadow. She'd always been capable of casting her own light. Driving home to the penthouse apartment she'd bought in Belltown, Elena reflected on the journey from supportive wife to CEO. The woman Marcus had dismissed as just the wife had built something far more valuable than he'd ever imagined possible. She'd built a legacy.